Hello everyone. Welcome to DEEPSIGHT. This is Lawrence. Let us take you on a journey through time and space to reveal the deep connotations behind historical events. In the past few issues, we introduced the medieval history of Britain and France. So what happened in the southern part of Europe during their time? In the past content, we introduced the complex historical context of the Islamic world, among which we introduced the post-Umayyad dynasty established on the Iberian Peninsula. Here, the Christians who lost their land did not lose their faith. They fought back against the Islamic regime in various places. This struggle lasted for 800 years and was one of the longest confrontations in human history. This is the famous Reconquista in history, also known as the Spanish Reconquista. It started in 718 AD and ended in 1492. This movement was the historical process of the Spaniards' resistance to Muslim occupation and their efforts to regain the Iberian Peninsula. Today, we will review the ups and downs of the land of Spain over the past 1,000 years from a detailed perspective. From the mystery of prehistoric cave paintings, to the glory of Muslim rule, to the magnificent war of the Reconquista, and finally the age of exploration, every chapter is worth exploring. Let's start this journey through time and space. Part 1. Spain in Prehistory and Classical Periods. The history of Spain can be traced back to the Paleolithic Age, when humans did not have language or writing, but had already begun to express emotions through art. The best example is the Altamira cave paintings, which are more than 15,000 years old and are known as the Sistine Chapel of prehistoric art. In these caves, we see realistic images of bison, horses, and deer, using natural materials such as ochre and charcoal. Archaeologists speculate that these paintings may be related to hunting rituals or religious beliefs at the time, and their state of preservation is amazing. Even the archaeologists who discovered it in the 19th century once doubted their authenticity. By the Iron Age, the Iberian Peninsula had become a cultural intersection. The Phoenicians were one of the first outsiders here. They established the trading port of Cadiz and brought writing systems and winemaking techniques to this land. Later, the Greeks also left their marks in the eastern part of the peninsula, especially the spread of pottery and mythological art. The Celts entered from the north and merged with the local Iberians to form a unique Celtic Iberian culture. One of the symbols of this culture is the Celtic chariot, a tool used to show power and wealth, which later became a treasure in many Spanish archaeological museums. Part 2. Roman Conquest and the Rise of the Visigothic Kingdom. In the 3rd century BC, the Iberian Peninsula became the focus of contention between Carthage and Rome. In the Second Punic War, Scipio Africa of Rome conquered the peninsula, turned it into a province of the Roman Republic, and called it Hispania. During this period, the Romans completely changed the face of the Iberian Peninsula. They built thousands of kilometers of roads, which not only promoted trade, but also became the basis of the later Camino de Santiago. During the heyday of Roman rule, some outstanding Romans appeared on the peninsula, such as the philosopher Seneca and the Emperor Hadrian. They were born in Spain, but became the core figures of Rome with their extraordinary talents and achievements. The Latin brought by Rome gradually evolved into today's Spanish, laying the linguistic foundation for the culture of modern Spain. With the decline of the Roman Empire, the Visigoths occupied the peninsula in the 5th century and established their own kingdom. Although they accepted many of Rome's cultural heritage, they were far less efficient than Rome in management. The political power of the Visigothic kingdom was concentrated in the hands of a few nobles, and the issue of succession to the throne continued to cause civil strife, laying the groundwork for the subsequent Muslim invasion. Part 3. Muslim Conquest and the Golden Age of Al-Andalus. In 711 AD, the Muslim army crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and began to conquer the Iberian Peninsula. The Muslim army crossed the Strait of Gibraltar and changed the history of the Iberian Peninsula in one fell swoop. However, this conquest was not accidental, but driven by multiple factors. First, Islam emerged in the Arabian Peninsula in the early 7th century AD. Muhammad's successors established a large empire spanning Asia and Africa through rapid military expansion. In this wave of expansion, the Muslim army conquered North Africa and consolidated its control over the Maghreb region in the early 8th century AD. At the same time, the Visigothic kingdom on the Iberian Peninsula was in civil strife. After the death of Witiza, the Visigothic king. A serious conflict broke out among the nobles in the kingdom over the succession to the throne. Roderick, one of the contenders for the throne, was unable to effectively control the entire kingdom, which provided an opportunity for foreign forces to invade. Against this background, the Muslim commander Tariq ibn Ziyad, under the order of the governor of the Umayyad Caliph, led an army of Berbers and Arabs across the Strait of Gibraltar and began to conquer the Iberian Peninsula. The strait was later named Gibraltar, after Tariq's name. In 711, Tariq's army fought a fierce battle with the army of Roderick, the Visigoth king, in the Battle of the Guadalete River. Although the Muslim army was smaller in number, Tariq won a decisive victory due to the division and rebellion within the Visigothic army. This battle not only led to Roderick's death, but also caused the resistance of the Visigothic kingdom to quickly collapse. After the victory, the Muslim army continued to conquer key cities such as Toledo, Seville, and Córdoba. By 718 AD, Muslims had controlled most of the Iberian Peninsula, with only the Asturias region in the northern mountains still in the hands of Christian forces. This conquest was epoch-making in the history of the Iberian Peninsula. Muslims named the peninsula Al-Andalus and brought it under the rule of the Umayyad Caliphate. Andalus under Muslim rule, the beginning of a golden age. During the 8 centuries of Muslim rule over the Iberian Peninsula, Muslims not only established a stable administrative system, but also made Al-Andalus a center of multiculturalism and science. The following are their main achievements during their rule. 1. Politics and administration. Al-Andalus was originally a province of the Umayyad Caliphate. After the fall of the Umayyad dynasty in Damascus, Abdul-Rahman established the Emirate of Córdoba in 756 AD. In 929 AD, Abdul-Rahman III further promoted it to the Caliphate of Córdoba, marking the emergence of Al-Andalus as an independent political entity. Muslim rulers implemented an efficient taxation system and established a sound judicial and administrative system. Local governors were responsible for managing towns, and taxes supported the construction of public buildings and irrigation systems. 2. Cultural and religious tolerance. Although Muslims were the ruling class, Al-Andalus implemented a policy of religious tolerance for a long time. Christians and Jews were allowed to retain their religious beliefs and only had to pay a poll tax, jizya. This tolerant environment promoted the exchange of various religious cultures, especially in the field of knowledge, where the 3 cultures inspired each other and gave birth to brilliant academic achievements. 3. Prosperity of science and art. The academic development of Al-Andalus has left a deep mark in world history. The following are some achievements in important fields. Medicine. Al-Zarawi is known as the father of surgery, and his Almighty Medicine has become a standard textbook for medical education in Europe. Philosophy. Averroes reinterpreted Aristotle's philosophy and influenced later European thinkers. Astronomy. Scholars in Al-Andalus improved astronomical instruments and compiled more accurate star catalogs. 4. Architecture and urbanization. The architecture of Al-Andalus combines Islamic, Roman, and Visigothic styles. The most representative buildings are the Great Mosque of Córdoba and the Alhambra Palace in Granada. The level of urbanization increased significantly. Córdoba became the largest city in Europe in the 10th century, with lighting systems, running water, and public baths. 5. Agriculture and economy. The Muslims introduced advanced irrigation technology, which brought agriculture in the peninsula to a new level. They planted crops such as orange trees, lemon trees, cotton, and sugarcane, injecting vitality into the local economy. Andalusian crafts, such as textiles and pottery, also became important commodities in trade. Muslim rule brought new vitality to the peninsula. They named it Al-Andalus and established a society that tolerated multiculturalism. In Córdoba, the coexistence of Muslims, Christians, and Jews was called the Age of Cultural Integration. Jewish scholars here, such as Maimonides, played an important role in the exchange of Arab and European philosophy. Andalus also became a beacon of science. Averroes provided the theoretical basis for the European Renaissance through his interpretation of Aristotle's philosophy. Zarawi's medical works influenced medieval European surgery, and astronomers compiled more accurate star catalogs. Part 4. Christian Resistance and Reconquista. Although Muslims ruled most of the Iberian Peninsula, the small Christian kingdoms in the northern mountains never gave up resistance. In the Battle of Covadonga, King Pelayo of Asturias led a small army to repel the Muslims, which was regarded as the beginning of the Reconquista. The Reconquista lasted for nearly 800 years, and the Christian kingdoms experienced countless alliances and internal disputes in the process. In the medieval history of the Iberian Peninsula, Castile and Aragon were the two most important Christian kingdoms. Their histories show distinct cultural, military, and political developments, culminating in the unification of the peninsula through marriage, which became the foundation of modern Spain. Castile's name comes from the land of the castles, Castilla, a region that was originally part of the Kingdom of Leon. As the Reconquista progressed, Castile gradually became an independent kingdom due to its military superiority. Castile separated from the Kingdom of Leon in the early 10th century. Through the construction of castles and military fortifications, Castile gradually became an important bulwark against Muslim forces. Its military culture was deeply rooted in the combination of territorial expansion and religious beliefs. Under the rule of Ferdinand I, Castile became the leader of Christian power in the Iberian Peninsula. He expanded his territory through marriage and military conquest. Castile's rulers took advantage of the Reconquista to push the borders of their kingdom southward. Castile not only led militarily, but also consolidated internal governance through legal institutions such as the fuero, which provided the legal framework for a unified Spain. Compared with Castile, Aragon has a more unique origin. It developed from a small feudal principality on the border of Charlemagne's empire. In the 9th century, Aragon developed from a small lordship to an independent kingdom. Aragon's geographical location enabled it to maintain good diplomatic and trade relations with Muslim kingdoms and Christian countries. In 1137, King Ramiro II of Aragon married his daughter to the Count of Catalonia, which merged Aragon and Catalonia. This union provided Aragon with a strong naval force and made it a Mediterranean power. Aragon is not only famous for its military conquests, but also for its cultural achievements. It absorbed Arab culture and French influences and became a diversified cultural center in Europe. In the late 15th century, the Christian kingdom of the Iberian Peninsula faced the last resistance of the Muslim Emirate of Granada. In order to strengthen the unity of Christian forces and quell internal royal conflicts, Castile and Aragon achieved a merger of power through marriage. Let's talk about the key figures in this marriage. Isabella I and Ferdinand II. Isabella was born into the royal family of Castile. Her childhood was turbulent, witnessing the internal struggle for the throne in Castile. She was known for her wisdom and firm character, and became the heir to the throne at the age of 18. Isabella's marriage was a hotly debated issue. She rejected the proposal of King Alfonso V of Portugal and chose Ferdinand of Aragon instead, a decision based on considerations of balance of power and common goals. Ferdinand was the crown prince of Aragon. He was known for his political acumen and military talent, especially good at diplomacy. The marriage with Isabella not only brought Castile's resources to Aragon, but also gave Ferdinand the opportunity to unify the peninsula. The two married secretly in Valladolid in 1469, because their marriage was not supported by the region of Castile at the time. In order to complete the marriage, they even obtained special permission from the Pope to bypass the obstacle of kinship. After the marriage was completed, Isabella became the Queen of Castile and Ferdinand became the King of Aragon. The two governed their respective kingdoms separately, but maintained cooperation on major affairs. Although their marriage did not immediately achieve political unification, it formed a dual kingdom model. The Emirate of Granada was established in 1238 and was the ruling center of the Nasrid dynasty. During the Restoration movement in the 13th century, as the Christian kingdom continued to expand southward, Granada became the last stronghold of Muslims on the peninsula. However, due to its unique geographical location and excellent fortifications, Granada successfully maintained its independence for more than 2 centuries. Granada's economy mainly relied on silk trade, agriculture, and taxation. However, with the siege of the Christian kingdom, trade routes were cut off and the economy gradually declined. Internal political instability also made the emirate more vulnerable. The Nasrid dynasty was constantly fighting within the family, and Boabdil at the end of the dynasty was even used many times in the power struggle between his father and uncle, and the regime became more divided. In 1469, Queen Isabella of Castile married Crown Prince Ferdinand of Aragon, paving the way for the complete unification of the Christian kingdom. The Catholic kings regarded the restoration as an important mission and the recovery of Granada as the ultimate goal of achieving religious unity. In the 1470s, the conflict between the two sides began to intensify. The Castilians launched small-scale attacks on the border villages of Granada, and the Muslim army also took similar counterattacks. However, the resources of the emirate were limited and could not match the Christian kingdom. In 1482, the fuse of the war was the division within the Nasri family. After losing power, Boabdil's father Abu Hassan started a civil war with Boabdil, which reduced the defense capacity of the entire kingdom. Against this background, Castile and Aragon jointly launched a full-scale offensive. There are several most important key stages in this war. The first stage, 1482 to 1487, Castile's gradual advancement. The core area of the Granada Emirate has strong fortifications, especially the Alhambra Palace, which is not only a political and military center, but also a symbol of the splendor of Muslim civilization in Iberia. In 1487, the Castilian army, under the command of Fernando, captured Malaga with powerful artillery technology. This victory cut off Granada's connection to the Mediterranean, making the economy and supply of the emirate more difficult. Phase 2, 1487 to 1491, comprehensive siege. The Christian army adopted a shrewd siege tactic against Granada. The coalition adopted a scorched earth policy to destroy agricultural production around Granada and cut off the city's source of food within. Building military bases, the coalition built temporary towns around Granada, such as Santa Fe, as forward bases for the attack. This eventually led to internal divisions in Granada. Boabdil's rule was opposed by the nobles within the kingdom, and many chose to surrender to Castile or secretly assist the coalition. The final decisive battle and surrender of the war took place in 1491 to 1492. In 1491, facing the siege of the Castilian army and the food crisis in the city, Boabdil was forced to negotiate with Isabella and Fernando. He agreed to hand over Granada on the condition that the rights of Muslim residents were guaranteed. The most important content of the agreement reached was that the Christian army promised not to massacre Muslim residents and allow them to retain their religious beliefs and cultural customs. On January 2, 1492, Boabdil handed the keys of Granada to Fernando and Isabella. Boabdil looked back at the Alhambra when he left the city and shed tears in sorrow. His mother said to him coldly, "Don't cry like a woman because you failed to defend it like a man." This scene was later called the last sigh of the Moor. The recovery of Spain was a major event in European history, with a huge impact on Muslims and Jews. Although the Alhambra Decree initially promised to protect Muslim residents, after 1492, the Catholic Kingdom gradually implemented a policy of religious unity. In March 1492, Isabella ordered that all Jews must convert or leave Spain. Subsequently, Muslims faced a similar fate. With the loss of Muslim elites, many Arab scientific and cultural traditions were interrupted. However, architectural wonders such as the Alhambra Palace remain witnesses of this history. Many years later, we can still understand from these historical relics that the original Islamic civilization in the Middle Ages was so high. The fall of Granada marked the religious and political unification of Spain. The victory of Isabella and Fernando further enhanced their prestige in Europe, and Spain became one of the most powerful countries in the world in the 15th century. It also opened the next stage of exploration, provided financial and political support for projects such as Columbus's voyage, and kicked off the era of Spain's maritime empire. 1492 was a double historical turning point for Spain. In addition to completing the restoration movement, they also funded Columbus's voyage, opening the age of geographical discovery. Columbus's voyage discovered the New World, which enabled Spain to quickly rise to become a global maritime empire. The wealth of the New World changed the fate of Spain. Conquistadors such as Cortés and Pizarro conquered the Aztec and Inca civilizations and brought large amounts of gold and silver back to Europe. However, this wealth also led to economic overdependence and laid the groundwork for the subsequent decline of Spain. We will introduce this wonderful history to you in detail in the next issue. The history of Spain is an epic of integration and struggle. From prehistoric art to Roman civilization, from the glory of Muslim rule to the restoration movement of Christianity, to the starting point of globalization, the stories on this land far transcend time and national boundaries. I hope today's program will give you a deeper understanding of Spain. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. See you next time.